Today's Thursday, so we talk about success for Scrum Masters. We've been sharing success stories here on the podcast since 2015, so there's a lot to learn. But wouldn't you like to learn from people with decades of experience? Well, don't worry, we've got you covered. The Scrum Master Toolbox podcast launched Tips from the Trenches, the Scrum Master edition audiobook. That's version 2 now out. There are 13 audio interviews, 3 hours of audio with Scrum Masters that have decades of experience. We've got Mike Cohn, Linda Rising, Lisa Crispin, Christopher Avery, Emily Weber, myself, your podcast host, Yves Hanul, the editor of the original Tips from the Trenches ebook, also available with the audiobook. Altogether, 13 super experienced Scrum Masters. To learn more, visit bit.ly/audiotips2. That's bit.ly/AUDIOTIPS and the numeral 2 at the end, all lowercase, all one word. So one more time, that's bit.ly/audiotips2 to learn more. And now, on to today's show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Success Thursday, this week with Helen Garcia. Hi, Helen. Welcome back.
Hi, Vasco. Thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. So, Helen, on Thursdays, we focus on the success for Scrum Masters, what it means and how to get there, obviously. But before we dive into that, share with us, what's your favorite retrospective format and why?
Okay, so I have one that was recently inspired by Paul Goddard on improv. And we also actually recently talked about it at our virtual meetup that we've run with Helen Garcia. It's basically about the remote environment that we actually work in at the moment, the virtual environment, and where we use our cameras a lot, right? We're always, not perhaps being with each other as much. And so my retrospective format was really, really simple. It wasn't about this sad, mad, glad. It wasn't like that. It was recognizing the strengths and weaknesses as a team and understanding our strengths and how we can use those strengths in order to harden our weaknesses and grow our weaknesses into strengths. So firstly, I started with an agreement and said, look, guys, we're going to be using our cameras quite a lot in this retro, and we need to be able to trust each other that when our cameras are off, we're not going to go and be tempted to work on other things, check Slack or WhatsApp or whatever it might be. We need to be committed to this retrospective. So I always think this is a good idea to have that commitment generally as a team before we go in, so that we can be committed not only to the retrospective, but to each other and to ourselves as well. So we use the cameras in a sense of we switch them off when we're not speaking, and when we're speaking, we talked about our strengths first. You'd switch your camera on and say whatever the strength was and then turn it off. We did the same with weaknesses as well. The bit that I really enjoyed actually about this way of delivering a retrospective is that it gave the people who don't necessarily speak up as much the opportunity to speak up. Because you're only allowed to come in and say your strength or say one word with your camera on. So it took away the dominant voices within a retrospective that hopefully I'm sure that we will sort of recognise, and it allowed a voice for everyone. So I really enjoyed that retrospective, and I got a lot of feedback on actually it was nice that we were able to use virtual environment and that the way that we usually speak to each other in this remote environment as well today. So that was good, but also being able to recognise our strengths and build and use those strengths rather than trying to invent something completely new to build upon our weaknesses. So it was slightly different, but this is a retrospective format that actually I think I'm going to try more often. I haven't seen around so much, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you that are interested in trying this out, definitely reach out to Helen, and we'll put the links to her LinkedIn page on the show notes so they can get in touch, because I'm sure that many of our listeners will want to reach out and learn a little bit more. Maybe you have a post or something that we can read through the instructions?
I can certainly do that, yes.
Absolutely. That That would be awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Helen. Now we turn our attention into what success means for us as Scrum Masters. Of course, that's one of the reasons why we do those retros in the first place. So share with us, Helen, what's your definition of success for Scrum Masters?
Ooh, my definition of success for Scrum Masters. So I think seeing individuals and teams being able to grow and seeing them have that sort of aha moment, seeing success of an organization and the value that's being brought to the customers. How do I measure that? How do I measure that as a success? Well, it's actually, it's difficult to measure that, I think, as an agile coach. I think you have to think about it in a sense of the Shu-Ha-Ri. I think we've all heard of this sort of transition of like being a teacher to understanding ourselves, to be able to develop our own ways of working, our own thoughts and experiments and things. So we need to adapt, or how I would measure that success is adapting the way that we think about stuff. So it's less about, these annual performance reviews or KPIs and stuff about that, but it's more, the output and seeing the output of the team, measuring on, team happiness, their ability to run their own sort of ceremonies without waiting for the Scrum Master to turn up. It sort of makes me laugh in the early days, but just having those small changes is just being able to measure the team's success really as they grow. So yeah, the aha moments for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that from what you mentioned, this ability to adapt is very important. And of course, we always talk about the teams adapting and the projects adapting and so on. But I would like to explore maybe a little bit more of your own experience, Helen, with your own personal adaptation, like how you evolve your approach and maybe how you set yourself up for that, right? To set up the environment for yourself so that you are ready to adapt. So how do you do that? How do you, first, how do you even detect when you need to adapt and how do you go about it?
It comes back again. I think I just am recognizing it more in myself, even through this conversation of having that observation is understanding, not only observing others and individuals, teams, organizations and all of that sort of stuff, but observing it within myself, thinking about how I react to certain situations, thinking about having a question, like asking a question rather than imposing an idea. It's okay also to be silent. In fact, it's a good thing to be able to embrace like silence so that team are able to just, develop themselves. So I think within me, having self-reflection and understanding and picking out not only what has gone badly, I guess, or has maybe been something that I can build upon, because I think often we recognise that over our successes, but recognising what did work and saying, I'm just going to write a few things down and saying, actually, that really worked. How did I know that worked? Because of A, B, C, D. Making those observations within the team, because unless we highlight those and unless we can reflect on those ourselves, then how are we ever going to know that something made a difference? So taking time for self-reflection as well. It's not just about having a retrospective with your team, but having a retrospective within yourself as well. That's a key importance that I've found over the time of being a Scrum Master. Yeah.
That's a great tip, Helen. Of course, I like practical tips, and I would love to hear how you help yourself do that self-reflection. So my own tip is that every Friday, I write down the things that I think are important from this week. And I make a point of writing them down by hand, not at the laptop or not at the phone, but rather so that, I have this idea that you absorb things through physical movement as much as you do through reflection or just thinking abstract thoughts, right? So I write those things and then I read them through and I try to come up with, okay, so what do I need to change and so on. But that's my approach. What's your approach, Helen? How do you help yourself do that self-reflection and constant adaptation as a Scrum Master?
I do it in a sense, I less write it down. Funnily enough, I write a lot of things down and I find that helpful. But in this moment, I actually take time for myself. I actually think about what came out of that conversation, like what changed within that conversation and pointing those out and thinking about it and sort of reflecting on others. So I take the approach of just taking time for myself, sitting down and thinking about the process of what went right and what went wrong. So I think about the questions that I've asked, actually, and I think about how the team understood those questions. And often I will go back and say, actually, were those questions powerful questions? Did I make them leading questions that weren't necessarily helpful for the team? And what kind of questions that I'd asked within a situation brought silence to the team? Because actually that's a good thing. It's making people think. So assessing a lot of the time questions that have been asked by myself and questions that have been asked for other people that have had an impact. They're the sorts of things that I do. I rarely write that reflection down, if I'm completely honest. I often have the reflection in my head and sort of play back things and say, actually, how did that work? What output or what change did that make? How did the team sort of develop in that way? So, I'll often have a lot of thoughts on it. I will write things down for the next, perhaps the next, ceremony or sprint planning session or coaching session of, this is what worked for you within just my notes on my computer. So I won't necessarily use that every time, but at least in my time of reflection where I have sort of my 5 minutes before the meeting and say, actually, remember about that, remember the impact that had, and remember, regardless of whether that was good or bad, or positive or negative, then I remember to bring that into the next meeting.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of great tips right there. So thank you for sharing that, Helen.
Okay, thank you.
Part of a successful Scrum Master job is to help the product owner. Tomorrow we explore that critical role in Scrum, the product owner role. Tune in to learn about product owner anti-patterns, what you can do to help the product owner, and a real-life example of what a great product owner is and what made it so, tomorrow on our Friday Product Owner episode. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.